This is Gemara and Yoma Daf Mem Beis. Apologies on a bit of the lateness of the shir, but Baruch Hashem, it's for fabulous reasons. I would like to share a tremendous mazel tov that Baruch Hashem, I had a baby boy early this morning. We should all continue to share in simchas the entire Daf Yomi Chevra Mir Hashem. The next simcha will be the bris, followed by the siyum on Yoma, which hopefully we'll be able to celebrate together very, very shortly. Of course, this month, the month of Sivan, has been sponsored generously as a special shidduch for Yishol Chaim ben Devaira. Mir Hashem, all the learning of the entire Chabura should be a tremendous chos for a shidduch hagoin bekarev, as well as our chelim Rivka bas Vashel Nafsil Tzvi ben Michal Esther Yitarachal bas Rivka Gittel Menu Vavega Chaim and Sarah Shalom Asivim Nezil Zar bas Kanandi Tavasin Chaysay Yisol Mendel is President Travelation Mas Naomi Shavega Shirchana Shmuel ben Tila Dinam ben Chan Rizim Chai bas Minali Brocha bas Tav Musa Dina Indo bas Sheina Mendel. We pick it up. We are on Mem Aleph Amid Beis. We are in the middle of the wide lines, about 8 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Chanan, Amar Rav, Eitz Erez, Ushni Toilas, Shal Kol Tasan, Shal Heves Kshera. Because we brought down one halacha of the Lashain Zahiris about the red wool, which we concluded yesterday's daf, which of course was both by the Para Aduma and by the Seir Mishtaleach, by the Seir, by the goat on Yom Kippur that they tied it around his head, they tied it around his neck. That was one application. The other application was by the Paraduma, excuse me. So we continue with a few more halachas the same way. Amar Rav Chanan Amar Rav, Eitz Erez Ushni Toilah Shel Kol Tasan Shel Heves Kshera. Says Rav Chanan in the name of Rav, if the Eitz Erez and the Shni Toilah, the red wool, they were caught by the flame and then they were burnt up. What's the halacha? It's still Kshera. What's the chiddush over here? So Rashi explains what's going on over here is that even though they were burnt up in the air, the pasuk tells us that we have to take all the ingredients and we have to put them together and we got to burn them together and create the ash, which we mix and we sprinkle on the person to give him the purification waters. So you would think if it gets burnt up in midair, it doesn't have that status. Says Rav Chanan Amar Rav, no, even if it gets burnt up into midair, it's still considered it is kosher. Meisvi asked the Gemara, 1 second, we see in a brayso in this Havev HaLashain, if the red wool strip was singed, what's the halacha? Maybe Lashon Acher Umekadish. You have to bring another strip and make it holy and sanctify it. So what do we see? We see burning it is no good. How can you tell me that burning it is kosher? Answers the Gemara, Abaye, Loi kasha kam b'koilachas, kam b'nichfefes. 2 types of fire. One is a fire that's straight up. So if it's a fire straight up, where does it get burnt? It gets burnt up here. If it gets burnt up here, then it never really got together, and therefore it's possible. Where the case where Rav Chanan Rav said it's kosher is when the fire is nichfefes, when the fire is crouching, it's low down, and therefore in such a case, even though it got burnt up by the fire, it's still going to be kosher. Taretz number 1 of Abayi. Says the Gemara, another answer, Rava Amar Rava says, Koive Tanahi. The halacha of Koive, the halacha that is L'shain Zel Zahiris, that is red wool. Again, this is one of the ingredients and they mix together by the Bara Aduma, whether it has to have a specific weight is a machlokes tanoim. The Tanya, as we learned in the Brayso Lamakarchan, why do you wrap all of the ingredients, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the red wool together? Says Rabbi, so they could all be in one wrapping. This is a similar halacha that we find by the Esrog, the Lulav, the Adasim, the Ravais, the Dalin Minim on Sukkot have to all be bound Aguda Achas. So to be a similar application. Rav Elazar Aimer, Rav Shimon, Rav Shimon Aimer, I'm sorry, and Koivein. You know why I have to wrap them together? Specifically so it has some weight. Why does it have to have some weight? So it could fall inside the Sreiva Zapara, which of course everyone can understand that is going to be the 2 machlokes. That if you hold that the reason has weight has to fall into the fire, so that if it gets singed on top, it's going to be possible. But if you hold it, no, just as a din of aguda achas, but not necessarily, does it have to have that extra weight, which would be Rav in the name of Rabbi, then it would be kosher even if it didn't get singed. Where Rav Elazar Rav Shimon is the one that's going to hold, it's going to be possible. Says the Gemara, Rav Dimi Amar Rav Yechlan. When Rav Dimi came, he said over the name of Rav Yechlan, again continuing the theme more halachos about this L'shain Shel Zahiris, this red wool, Shalish L'shainei Shamati. I heard halacha about 3 strips of red wool. Acha Shal Para. One is of the Para Aduma, which are middle of this discussing the goat that's sent away, La'azazel, thrown off the mountain, which is why we got into this whole discussion. And one is of a Mitzaira. And he continues, says Rav Dimi, Achas, one of them, Mishkalas Sarazas. Of course, he used to weigh things by coins. Why? Because you have, old-fashioned scale with the two sides. You put something on one side, you put coins on the other side to weigh it down. So it says, Rav Dimi Amar Rav Yochanan, we have 3 strips of wool. We have by the Bara Aduma, we have the Sira Mishalech, and we have the Mitzaira. One is Asarazas, one is 10 zuz, V'achas Mishkal Shnei Salaim, V'achas Mishkal Shekel. 3 different weights. Ve'en li lefarish. And says Rav Dimi Amar Rav Yochanan, I don't know which is which. I forgot. I don't know which of the 3 is which. Says the Gemara, Ki Asa Ravin Pirsha Mishmeid Rav Yonasan. When Rava came, he explained the name of Rav Yonasan moving over to Mem Beis, Amar Aleph, today's daf, Shel Para by the Para Aduma Mishkal Esara Zuz. That is the heaviest one, like we saw the halacha that has a special din of koiv, it has to have a weight it. That's Esara 10 Zuz. Shel Sira Mishaleach Mishkal Snei Salayim. Has to be worth 2 Salayim. Why? That's like we saw yesterday, this halacha by the Sira Mishaleach. They have to take that piece away, you have to rip it in half. So if you have to rip it in half, that has to have some substantial ability to it, some substance, so you can rip it in half. That's Shnei Salayim. B'shal Mitzaira, and the Mitzaira Mishkal Shekel. That is the least amount, that there neither is a din that has to have weight, nor is there a din they have to split it in half, and therefore it suffices if it's 1 shekel weight. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yochanan Pligi bar Rav Shimon ben Chalafta v'Rabbanan. So Rav Yochanan comments, you just told me, you Rav Dimi just told me halacha about 3 strips of wool. You told me about 3 weights, 10 zuz, 2 slayim, and 1 shekel. Says Rav Yochanan, this is in reality a machlekes between Rav Shimon ben Chalafta and the Rabbanan with regard to bipara, the size, the quantity of the wool by the para aduma. Chad amar mishkel asara, like we just said, v'chad amar mishkel shekel. And some say no, that the para aduma is in reality the lowest quantity. It's enough, even if it has 1 shekel. I guess even though it'll be so small, you'll still have some level, be able to split it in half. And if you want to remember how you know this halacha, the famous halacha, that whether you give a lot, whether you give a little bit, and of course we know the end of the statement is bilvad sheyechavin liboy lashamayim. You just have to have good intentions. You have to have kavana. So he explains that that's the 2 extremes. Echanamar be 10 zuz, v'echanamamit, and 1 shekel. Omer lei Rav Yirmiyah medifti the Ravina. He argues loy bepara bligi. No, that's not where this machlekes is. It's not about para aduma. Elo b'siyar mishaleach bligi. The argument about the Yoma Rabbi Bar Kisi, and that day Rabbi Bar Kisi was nifter v'anchu b'simonei Rabbi Bar Kisi mechaber kisir mishtaleach. And they said, you remember it the same day that they had this machlekes is the day he was nifter. That's a remembrance that it's mechaber. It gives you kapara like the siyar mishtaleach, similar to the misa of a tzaddik. Those are 2 ways, 2 potential understandings in the weight, whether they're arguing about the weight of the para aduma or of the Seir HaMishalech. Amar Rav Yitzchak Shtei Shchitais Shamati. Says Rav Yitzchak, I'll tell you another halacha. Another halacha is there are 2 dinim about shchita. What are these 2 halachas? Achas shel paro, v'achas shel paroi. One is the para aduma. One is the par of the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur, which we already learned about. The Kohen Gadol is doing vidu, he's leaning on, and he's bringing a carbon. So we have 2 different parais. We have a para aduma, and we have the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. And these 2 animals, achas ksheir bizar. One of them, azar, and an Kohen can do the shchita, achas psula bizar, and one of them is possible. V'lo yadana iminayu. And I don't remember, again, a similar halacha, I don't remember which is which. Says the Gemara, let's try to figure it out. Itmar, we learn shchita as parayu, parai. The shchita of his par is bull and the para aduma. Rav Shmuel, Chadomar para psula. Paroi Ksheira. One of them held that the Para Aduma is possible and his Para is kosher. V'chanamar Paroi Psula Para Ksheira. So we have this is a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Who's who? Says the Gemara. V'distayim the Rav who the Amar Para Psula. I'll bring you a raya that Rav is the shita that holds that the Para Aduma cannot be done by a zar by a non-kohen, whereas his Para in Yom Kippur could yes be done by a zar and non-kohen. The Amar Rav Zera shchitas Para bizar psula. That's Rav Zera. V'amar Rav Alon. Rav came on the tzimon of Rav Zera and he said, Elazar v'chuka shaninuba. He gave a source for the din of Rav Zera, seemingly pointing out that he himself concurs with Rav Zera, showing us that Rav is the one of the opinion that holds, as the Gemara, that Para Aduma is the one that will be pasul bizar, whereas his Par in Yom Kippur will be kosher bizar. Says the Gemara, really? Is that true? V'rav ma'ishna parod d'chsev Elazar v'chuka paroi nami yoksiv aharoin v'chuka. If you're telling me the whole reason why by the Para Aduma it's possible by Azar, it's because the Torah said Elazar and Chuka. Says Gemara, I don't understand. By his Par in Yom Kippur, you know what it says? Very similar. Aaron, which is like Elazar, a Kain. V'chuka. So how are you telling me that his Par in Yom Kippur can be done by Yisrael? Answers the Gemara, Shchita lav avoidi. Fascinating answer. Something that we've really touched upon numerous times when we already mentioned this concept of Shchita. Share bizarre. We mentioned whether you're going to have to do a goyrel for the shchita. We pointed out that as much as we view shchita as one of the integral ingredients of every carbon, but it's not considered an avoida, and that is the reason why, says the Gemara, that when the Torah says avoida, it's not by Yom Kippur, it's not going to be referring to the shchita, and that's the reason why Rav is going to hold that by Para Aduma it's possible by Azar, but by his Par in Yom Kippur it's going to be kosher by Azar. Says the Gemara, 1 second, we'll flip it around. Why don't we see the same thing by the Para Aduma, that it's not a proper avoida, so it should be kosher even bizarre? Answers the Gemara, shiny Para Aduma is different. For what reason? They can't shape because Para Aduma is an item which is holy for the Bedek Habayis, the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, which we know has Kedushas Damim, has the level of sanctity of its money, and it's not inherent Kedusha, it's not in itself. But you think about that too far, because as soon as you think about what does everyone say, wait, if it doesn't have Kedushas Hagof, it's not inherently holy, rather it only has Kedushas Damim. Wait, that's not a reason to be better, that's a reason to be worse, that's a reason to be lower. Why are you, the Gemara, explaining that's a reason to say that as a higher status it can't be done by Azar? The opposite. Ask the Gemara 1 second. V'lav kol dechenu. It's a kal v'chaymer. If it's kachi bedek habayis, then certainly it shouldn't be so chamer. Certainly it shouldn't be so stringent, and it should be allowed to be done by a Yisrael. Amar Rav Shisha Berei de Rav Idi. I'll tell you what the answer is. Midei dahavi amoroyim negayim delav avoidehi. Says Rav Shisha Berei de Rav Idi, that when it comes to the Para Aduma, the reason why the shchita is possible if it's done by Yisrael is because it's similar to the marais of Negayim, the lava voidihi, and ubayikuna and needs kuna. So we're equating the Para Aduma, the holiness attained by a Para Aduma, is similar to the holiness necessary by Mitzayra, by a Nega, by Tsaras, and therefore, just like by Tsaras, the din is, even though it's not a proper avoida, it has to be done by a kohen, so too over here it's going to have to be done by a kohen. Says the Gemara, 1 second. I'm sorry, Telav Avaidihi Ubaya Kuhuna. And it'll be possible bizarre. Ulishmuel Damar Paroi Psula. Okay, so now was the opinion of Rav. That was Rav who said that Para Aduma is possible by a Zar. So what does Shmuel hold the opposite? Ulishmuel Damar Paroi Psula. His own par will be possible. Maishna Paroi. What's the reason his par will be possible if the shchita is done by a Zar? Says the Gemara, the Chsiv, it says in the Torah, Aaron Bechuka. But Paranami Yoksiv Elazar Bechuka, the same question. Just in the reverse. Answers the Gemara, Shiny Awesome, the Chsiv, Shachat Oisa, Lifanav. What does that teach us? Sheizar Shoichet. For the fact that the Torah says it should be shechted Lifanav of Elazar, sounds like Elazar, the Kohen, he himself is not doing the Shechita. It's in front of the Kohen. Which means, who's doing the Shechita? The Israel. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Sheizar Shoichet Sorry, Lefanav, one more time. Shachat Isa and Lefanav. Shachat Isa Lefanav. Shizar Sheichet Belazar Roye. So that's how Shmuel's going to learn by the par of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is possible by in Yisrael. V'Rav, what does Rav say with this pasuk? Shleizir Dait V'Menu. Rav says the Torah says Shachat Isa Lefanav. Teach you a different halacha. It teaches me it has to be Lefanav, meaning it has to be within your das, has to be in your mind. You have to be cognizant. You can't take your mind off there for one moment. Where does Shmuel know that halacha? You have to always be thinking about the carbon nafkalei. The fact that by para aduma it says be leinav in front of your eyes teaches me that you cannot be misiach das. You cannot think or not think about it for a moment. V'Rav chad b'shchita v'chad b'sreifa. And Rav says no, we need two different psukim. One by the shchita, the par, and Yom Kippur, and one by the sreifa, the burning of the par aduma on Yom Kippurim. I'm sorry, the burning of the par aduma regularly, and the Gemara explains to Sricha, there's a reason why we need two psukim according to Rav. Again, shchita always has a stringent element in that it's the first part of the avodah. Aval sreifa emaloi, but when it comes to burning the karba, burning the part of aduma, it doesn't have that same stringency. So Sricha, we had to say it both ways. Because Rachmana b'sreifa, so just say it by the sreifa, say it by the part of aduma. I would have thought Misham the hashtu in the miskasher kapara. Because when you burn the ashes, when you burn the bar aduma, that's what gives the kapara. Aval shchita emaloi, but shchita I would say not. Sreicha, therefore, according to Rav, that is why we had to say two different times that it has to be bedas. You cannot not think about it for one moment. Says the Gemara. Okay, that was the machlekes Rav and Shmuel with regard to whether the para aduma or the par of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is pasul bizarre. Rav said it's referring to the par of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, and Shmuel said it's referring to the para aduma. Says the Gemara. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Shmuel says referring to the par of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur, and Rav says referring to the para aduma. Says the Gemara, Lemu'utei mai. Why does the Torah say that by the para aduma, it's that which parts of the avodah, I should say, do not have to be bedas by the para aduma? Like, actually, let's just look at Rashi for a moment. Rashi speaks out, Lemutei mai deloy pasal be as chadas ve'isapara. Which parts of para aduma are not pasal if they're not on your mind, if there's as chadas? Says the Gemara, ilem lemutei seifas para umilui mayim lekiddush. If it's coming to exclude the gathering together of the para of the ashes and the milui of the mayim and the filling of the water in order to mix all the ingredients together, as we turn over to Membeizim and Beis, Lemishmeres Lemei Nida Ksif. But no, it can't be, because the Torah says Lemishmeres, to guard it, Lemei Nida, which shows us that the pasuk is teaching us that when it has to be bidas, you have to think about it like a mishmeres. You have to be guarding it. Is with regard to the sprinkling it of it as well. They know what it's coming to exclude. Ashlachas eats erez ve'eza v'shnita las. That when it comes to when you throw with the erez, the eitz erez, the ezav shtiyatay last, the lav gufay deparninu. Those aren't the intrinsic integral ingredients of the para aduma. So if those items are not on your das, if you're masiach taito, it's still going to be kosher. Says the Gemara, let's go back. We had at the bottom of the Amin of Machlekes Rav and Shmuel. What is the status if the shchita of either the par aduma or of the par of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is pasal bizar? Says the Gemara Itmar, in reality there are other Amoraim who have a similar machlekes, 3 lines on the top. Membeis and Mirbeis. Shchitas para bizar. If you shecht with the para aduma by an ankoyin Rav Ami Amar Kshira v'Tignavcha Amar Psula. Ula Amar Kshira, and Ula says it's kosher. Rav Ami la Psula, and some say it's possible. So Maas Rav Yeshua bar Abba l'Siul Rav. Rav Yeshua bar Abba asks a question on Shmuel, proving the opinion of Rav that the para aduma is possible if it's done by Yisrael. It says in the Braisa, I would only know with regard to the Hazah the sprinkling. Meimel, this is by the para aduma, when you sprinkle the whole kingakshin, the burnt ashes with the water. The sprinkling of the water, that it is pasul if it's done by a she'in kshirim bi'isha kibe'ish, that it's not allowed to be done by a woman. And number two, ve'in kshirim el b'yoyim, it's only allowed to be done by day. That's when it comes to the sprinkling. Minayin the rabbis, shchitasai, kabbalas dama, the slaughtering, the catching of the blood, hazasa, the sprinkling dama of the blood, v'sreifasa, and the burning, and the sprinkling of all these different ingredients, the red wool, the hyssop, and the cedar wood. Talmud Loimar says in the Torah, it says in the Torah that it is a law, it is a rule. So I would think I would think it comes to include that it has to be only by day. I would think that it comes to include that it's only kosher by day. One more time, excuse me. So one hand says zois, which of course we've seen this many times. We have a reboy part of the pasuk comes to it. It's expansive and it includes. Part of the pasuk is limiting. That's the zois. So says the Gemara, how do you know? The rabbis say, how do you know which one to include and which one to exclude? On one hand, we're saying part of the avodas have to be done by day, and part of the avodas don't have to be done by day. So how do you know that we're going to include the shechita, and when it comes to catching the blood, and we're going to exclude gathering it all together, filling it all up, mixing it, etc. Says the Gemara, achar shariba hakosaf umiyot, the Torah added on, and then the Torah limited. Amart harani lamedin kulan me'azasa meimel. I said that we're going to learn everything from the hazas meimel, the sprinkling. What's the common denominator? What's the point that's unique about the sprinkling hazas meimel? When it comes to the sprinkling, einon ksherim be'isha kebe'ish. It's not kosher with a woman. Ve'ein ksherim el b'yom. It's only kosher by day. Afani avi. We're going to bring things that are similar to the sprinkling. Shchitas v'kabbalas dama v'hazas v'hazas dama u'shreifasa v'shachas zeres ve'izay v'shtitelas. Now what? How are they similar? They're not kosher by a woman that we know. So now we're going to come to say all these items, the shechita, kabbalah, dama, all these items are similar in the fact that they cannot be done by a woman. So therefore, in ksherim ela b'yoyim, they're only going to be kosher by day. And I'm going to come to exclude asifas abar, the gathering of the ashes, filling up the water, the kiddush. Those are kosher by a woman. So they're going to be kosher by day. So says the Gemara, very gishmak. We know there's one halacha with regard to can it be done by a woman. That we know is yes when it comes to this whole list of azaz, the shechita, etc. And therefore we're going to include it. It's going to be similar to azaz of the dam. Whereas when it comes to gathering together of the ashes and the filling up the water, which we know cannot be done, which we know can yes be done by a woman, therefore will not be equated. And that's going to be the Kasha on Shmuel and the Raya to Rav. But now the Gemara speaks out. How is this a Raya to Rav? V'hai mai to Yofta. Why is this a question on Shmuel? Again, what was the machlekes Rav and Shmuel? Nothing what we just said. Nothing to do with Yisra, nothing to do with a woman, nothing to do with doing it by day. What was the machlekes? Whether the shechita can be done by a zar and an kain. So it says the Gemara, you know what you're going to tell me? You're going to tell me just like it's possible by a woman, it's possible by an ankayin. Hazas meimel techiach. That's not true because we see by the sprinkling. What do we see by the sprinkling? Shapsulim be'isha and Shein bizarre. So what is its price have anything to do with Rav and Shmuel? You started off saying, I'm going to ask you a kasha and Shmuel and a raya to Rav for this whole elongated price, which we discussed doing it by day, discussed doing it by a woman. Says the Gemara, no shaykhis. That is nothing to do with a zar, a non-kohen doing the shchita. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Hainu Tiyofte. Let me explain what's going on over here. This is the kasha on Shmuel. Isha my taima. What is the reason reason that we are excluding an Isha by the Paraduma woman, Elazar, because you learn out from the Torah, that's be done by Elazar. The Shechita of Lo Isha cannot be done by a woman. Zarnami Elazar Lo Zar. That's the same Lima that has to be done by Elazar and not a Yisrael. That is, how Abaye explains how this is a Raya to Rav and a Kasha and Shmuel. Amar Ula comes like Ula, and we're just going to begin Ula. Ula now is going to go through Para Aduma, and he's going to give us numerous drashas. So we're going to see a few of them right now, and the rest are going to really be on tomorrow's daf. So Amar Ula, about 20 lines from the bottom. The first one of the line is Kol. Amar Abaye Kol, Amar Ula, Kol Parsha Kula. The entire Parsha, when it comes to Para Aduma, Mashma Moitzi Miyad Mashma, Moitzi miyad mashma, umashma mimela. There's two mashmais, there's two implications we have in the parsha of Paraduma. In some psukim, there's a mashma, it's implied, which comes to change that which is implied elsewhere, and other times there's something that's implied that stays the same. Basically, there's two implications. Sometimes the implication says, don't think what you thought, and sometimes the implication, the mashmaya, says, no, this is the way it is. Now the Gemara is going to speak this out. First of all, what does it say? That you should give it, Isa, to a Lazar HaKayin, Isa le'Elazar. You give it to Elazar the Para Aduma, but only that first Para Aduma. But future generation does not have to be given to Elazar. Rather, who should do it if not Elazar? That the Kohen Gadol would do it. Elazar was not the Kohen Gadol. So maybe future generations, it does not have to, it could yes be done by the Kohen Gadol. It had to be done by any Kohen Hadid. Says the Gemara, and not just coming to exclude Elazar. That's very good. Says the Gemara, where do we know that from? We already learned out that it has to be done by the Kohen Gadol. Says the Gemara, Gamar chuka miyoma kippurim v'hoitzi oisa. And I'm sorry, so we learn out chuka from Yom Kippur, that just like by Yom Kippur, it's done by the Kohen Gadol, so too over here, the Para Aduma has to be done by the Kohen Gadol. Says the Gemara, v'hoitzi oisa, that the pasuk continues and says, take out, I saw it. That teaches us that when you take it outside, but you should not take another Para Aduma with it. Again, you take out the Para Aduma outside the camp, but not another Para Aduma. As we see in a Mishnah, let's say the Para Aduma is not moving, it's not walking. So what are you going to do? You can't just pull it. Why can't you pull it? Because you're not doing any work with the Para Aduma. And if you're going to pull it, that's called work. So maybe you'll take a different animal, bring it out, and then the Para Aduma will follow suit. Says, you can't do that. So you know why? They don't want you to say the other animal, the black one, the not Para Aduma shechted. Number one, you can't bring a different Para Aduma out with it. Why? We don't want them to say that they shechted two Para Adumas at one time. And Rabbi Yomer Loimen Hashem, who's that? No, that's not the reason that you don't think of the second par. A special example I cost if you can't think of two Para Adumas. The Tanakama, Man Tanakama says the Gemara of Shimini, he doesn't care about the pasuk of Isa. Why? The Darish time of Dekra, he learned that the Torah gives us reasonings. My Beinayu, what's the difference in Tanakama and Shimini? Beinayu says the Gemara, turning over to Mem Gimel and concluding, the Apik Chomer Bahada. The Nafkamina is whether we are Apik Chomer Behada, says the Gemara, which Rashi explains to me that according to Tanakama, it's going to be mutter, because we don't go with the reasoning, whereas according to Rav Shimon, it's going to be forbidden. And again, we're going to pick up from here as Ula continues darshaning all the psukim about the Para Aduma